This is Charlotte's Web, Chapter 2. Wilbur. Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied his bib on, and held a bottle for him. Every afternoon when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for him. She fed him again at supper time and again right before bed. Mrs. Arable gave him feeding around noontime each day when Fern was at school. Wilbur loved milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her with adoring eyes. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove in the kitchen. Then, when Mrs. Arable complained, he was moved to a bigger box in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Arable fixed a special yard just for Wilbur underneath the apple tree and gave him a large wooden box full of straw with a doorway cut in it so he could walk in and out as much as he pleased. "Won't he be cold at night?" asked Fern. "No. Watch and see what he does," said her father. Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree in the yard. Wilbur ran to her and she held the bottle. When he finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleepily over to the box. Fern peered through the door. Wilbur was poking the straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel in the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered with straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her to know that her baby would sleep covered up, and then he would be warm. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited for her until the school bus came. She waved goodbye to him, and then he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around the turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up in his yard, but as soon as she got home, she would take him out, and he would follow her all over the place. If she went up to the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom step until she came down again. If she took her doll for a walk in the doll carriage, Wilbur followed. Sometimes on those journeys, Wilbur would get tired, and Fern would pick him up and put her in the carriage beside the doll. He liked this, and if he were very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep underneath the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed, too, because his eyelashes were very long. The doll would close her eyes, too, and Fern would wheel the carriage very slowly and smoothly so she would not wake her infants. One warm afternoon, Fern and Avery put on bathing suits and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded in the brook, Wilbur waded with her. He found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed, Wilbur amused himself in the mud, where it was very warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was a happy day, and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers call a spring pig, which means he was born in the springtime. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arable said he was now big enough to sell, and he would have to be sold. Fern broke down and wept, but her father was firm about it. Wilbur's appetite had increased, and he was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arable was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. "He's got to go, Fern," he said. "You've had fun raising your baby pig, but Wilbur's not a baby anymore, and he must be sold." "Call up the Zuckermans," suggested Mrs. Arable to Fern. "Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes there to live, you can walk down the road and visit him as much as you want." "How much money should I ask for him?" Fern wanted to know. "Well," said her father, "he's a runt. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig to sell for $6. See what he says." It was soon arranged. Fern phoned and got Aunt Edith, and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer, and Uncle Homer came in from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard the price was $6, he said he would buy the pig. Next day, Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree and went to live in the manure pile in the cellar of the Zuckermans' barn. And that's the end of Chapter 2.